The town of Red Hollow sat quiet under the dying sun, its streets covered in orange dust and wind-blown papers. It was the kind of place where time felt slow, where a man could hear the clink of his own spurs echo down the road. But that evening, something unusual pulled the townsfolk out of their homes. Behind the old sheriff's office, a rough wooden platform had been built, and a crowd of curious faces gathered around it. There was no music, no laughter, no talk of cattle or crops. Only the sharp voice of the auctioneer broke the silence. He stood beside a wagon with two strange things on display, a chained woman and a coffin. The woman sat on the edge of the wagon, her hands bound in iron cuffs, her head bent low. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled with dust and her feet bare against the splintered boards. No one knew her name, where she came from, or what she had done. Some said she was part of a lost caravan. Others whispered she was found wandering near the old mines after a fire had swept through. No one had seen her speak a single word. Next to her lay the coffin. It was plain pine wood, roughly nailed together without a nameplate or mark. It looked freshly built, but old dust clung to it, as if it had been waiting for someone or something and for a long time. The air around it felt heavy. The auctioneer's voice carried over the crowd. $7, he shouted. For both, the woman and the box. The people looked at each other. No one spoke. Some men laughed nervously. Others shook their heads and backed away. A shopkeeper whispered, "Who'd pay for that? She won't talk, won't eat in that box. I swear I heard something move inside last night." The blacksmith grunted. "It's cursed. Sheriff should have buried it and been done." But the sheriff didn't come. No one wanted to claim either the woman or the coffin. Then a voice came from the edge of the crowd. It was calm, steady, almost quiet, but it carried through the wind. "I'll take them." Heads turned. A tall man stepped forward, his hat low, his coat worn from years of hard work. It was Caleb Turner, a rancher who lived a few miles out of town. Folks knew him as a man who kept to himself. He had fought in the war years ago and came back with a limp and eyes that didn't show much. The auctioneer squinted. "You sure, mister?" $7 for the pair. No refunds, no questions. Caleb nodded once. He reached into his pocket, pulled out $7 silver and placed them on the crate. The coins rang against the wood, sharp in the quiet. The auctioneer shrugged, picked up the money, and stepped aside. Caleb walked to the wagon. The woman lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his for the first time. They were gray and hollow, but behind them was something. Fear, yes, but also a small spark of life. He said softly, "You're free now." "Come on," she didn't move at first. When he reached for the chains, she flinched as if she expected pain. Caleb paused and waited, his hand steady but gentle. Slowly, she let him unfasten the cuffs. Her wrists were raw and bruised, and when the iron dropped away, she rubbed them as if she couldn't believe it was real. The crowd began to drift apart. Some men muttered that Caleb was a fool. Others crossed themselves. The wind picked up, carrying away the sound of boots and whispers. Caleb turned to the auctioneer. "What's in the coffin?" The man spat into the dust. "Don't know, don't want to." Sheriff said it came with her. "She keeps whispering not to open it, so I didn't. Now it's yours." Caleb glanced at the woman again. Her lips trembled, and she said the first words anyone had heard from her. "Don't open it," she whispered. "Please." He gave a slow nod. "I won't." That night, Caleb drove his wagon home through the long dirt road that led to his ranch. The stars began to appear one by one, scattered across the deep blue sky. The sound of the wagon wheels rolling over gravel filled the quiet night. The woman sat beside the coffin, her hands folded in her lap, her face pale in the moonlight. For miles, neither of them spoke. Caleb didn't push her to talk. He had seen too many people broken by life and knew that silence sometimes said more than words ever could. When they reached the ranch, the place looked peaceful, a wide open field, a barn, and a small wooden house that smelled faintly of coffee and hay. Caleb climbed down, helped her from the wagon, and pointed toward the porch light. "You can rest inside," he said. "I'll see to the horses." She hesitated, then nodded faintly and stepped through the doorway. The room was warm and simple. A fire burned low in the stove, and a blanket lay over the chair. She sat down, still glancing toward the window where the wagon stood, the coffin still on it. When Caleb came back in, she spoke again, only a few words. "You should bury it." He looked out at the wagon through the window. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Not tonight." Her hands shook as she held the cup of water he gave her. "It shouldn't be here," she whispered. "They'll come for it," Caleb frowned. "Who?" She didn't answer. She only closed her eyes and whispered the same words again. "Don't open it." Outside, the wind picked up and the barn door creaked. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. The horses shifted uneasily, their hooves thudding against the ground. Caleb walked outside again to check the wagon. The coffin sat there still and quiet, the moonlight shining across its surface. For a moment, he thought he heard something faint, a soft tapping sound like a heartbeat coming from inside. He froze, waiting. The sound stopped. He stepped closer and laid his hand on the lid. Cold, still. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe it was his imagination. He drew his hand back slowly. When he returned to the house, the woman had fallen asleep by the fire, her head resting on her arm. The chains lay on the table beside her, a reminder of where she had been. Caleb looked at her for a long time, then at the shadows that flickered along the walls. He knew there were things in this world that didn't need understanding, only kindness. He took a blanket, placed it gently over her shoulders, and sat down across from the fire. Outside, the night stretched silent and endless. The wind whispered across the fields, and somewhere out there the coffin waited, closed heavy, and full of secrets that neither of them was ready to face. Caleb leaned back in his chair, his hat tilted low, and listened to the quiet breath of the woman sleeping near the flames. He didn't know who she was or what she had been through, but something inside told him that his life, which had been still and empty for years, was about to change in ways he could never imagine. The days passed quietly on Caleb's ranch. The woman, Mara, spoke very little. She helped with simple chores around the house, carrying water, washing dishes, feeding the hens, but she always kept her distance. She never smiled, never laughed, and every time the wind blew against the shed where the coffin rested, she would stop what she was doing and stare toward it until the breeze faded again. Caleb didn't press her with questions. He had learned that some truths took time to come out and some never did, but he noticed small things about her. The way she would wake up at night from bad dreams, whispering to someone unseen. The way she sometimes hummed softly, like she was trying to remember a tune she once sang to a child. Each morning before sunrise, Caleb would go out to the barn to feed the horses. He'd find her already awake, standing near the window, watching the shed through the glass. He started to wonder if there was something more than grief holding her heart captive. One morning, after several quiet weeks, Caleb found her in the kitchen, staring at the steam rising from her cup. He said gently, "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to. I can take you to town, find you a place." She looked up for the first time that day. Her eyes were tired but steady. "No," she said softly. "I can't leave. Not until I know." "Know what?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, "It's not empty." Caleb's stomach tightened. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell her she was mistaken, that nothing could still be alive inside after so long. But when he looked at her face, he saw no madness there, only sorrow deep and endless. That night, the sky turned dark with storm clouds. The wind came first, howling through the hills. Then thunder rolled across the plains, shaking the windows. Caleb ran outside to secure the barn doors before the rain hit. Lightning flashed across the field, turning everything white for an instant. The shed door creaked open from the wind. Caleb rushed toward it, pulling it shut, but the gust was strong enough to knock him back. The coffin inside had shifted, one of its nails popping loose. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard a faint sound, a low whimper, almost like a cry. He froze. The rain began to fall, heavy and cold. He leaned closer, pressing his ear against the wood. There it was again, a soft, weak breath. "Mara!" he shouted, his voice barely heard through the storm. She came running from the house, her dress soaked, her hair flying in the wind. When she saw the coffin, her face turned pale. "No!" she cried. "Don't open it!" But Caleb didn't listen. He grabbed the crowbar from beside the shed and pried the lid loose. The wood split open with a loud crack. What he saw inside made him stumble back. It wasn't bones or ashes. It was a small child, a boy no more than 3 years old. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. Wrapped in an old blanket, he looked as if he had been sleeping for days. Mara dropped to her knees beside the coffin, tears streaming down her face. "My son," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My little one." They told me he was gone." She lifted the boy carefully, pressing him close against her chest. The child's eyes fluttered open weakly, and he looked at her as if seeing a memory come to life. Caleb stood there in the rain, unable to speak. He had seen many strange things in his life, but this was beyond all reason. Yet it was real. The boy coughed softly and Mara rocked him gently, crying into his hair. They carried him inside, wrapped him in warm blankets and set him near the fire. Caleb brought water and a bit of broth, and Mara held the spoon with shaking hands, helping her son drink. For hours the storm raged outside, but inside the small house there was peace. The boy's breathing grew stronger, and soon he drifted into a deep sleep. Mara sat beside him, never letting go of his hand. When the storm passed and the dawn came, the first sunlight touched the window. Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her. She looked up at him with red, swollen eyes, but managed a faint smile. "I thought he was gone forever," she said. "They took everything from me, my family, my home. I didn't know they still had him. I was sold away. They told me he was buried, but I kept hearing him in my dreams crying for me." Caleb nodded slowly. "You never gave up." "I couldn't," she said, brushing her hand through her son's hair. "A mother knows when her child still breathes somewhere." Caleb sat beside the fire, thinking about how she had come to that auction, broken, silent, chained, and how $7 silver had changed everything. He didn't believe much in miracles, but that morning felt close to one. When the boy finally woke, he stared at Caleb with wide, curious eyes. Caleb smiled gently and offered him a piece of bread. "You've got your strength back, little man," he said. The boy nodded shyly and leaned against his mother. Mara smiled again, faint but real this time. In the days that followed, warmth returned to the ranch. Mara began to laugh softly with her son, showing him the chickens, the horses, and the pond beyond the field. Caleb would watch from the porch, pretending to fix tools, but his eyes always followed them. He built a small wooden cross near the shed where the coffin had once been, not as a grave, but as a reminder of what they'd survived. Every evening when the sun went down, Mara would sit by it with her son and say a quiet prayer. One evening, as they watched the sunset turn the sky golden red, Mara turned to Caleb. "You saved us," she said softly. Caleb shook his head. "No, I just brought you home." She looked at him for a long moment. "Home," she repeated as if testing the word. Then she smiled, a full, true smile that made Caleb's chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. From that day on, Mara and her boy stayed at the ranch. She cooked, cleaned, and helped with the garden. The child grew stronger, chasing the chickens, laughing in the fields. The house, once quiet and lonely, filled with sound again. Small footsteps, gentle singing, the kind of life Caleb thought he'd never have near him again. Sometimes at night he'd sit by the fire thinking of how strange fate could be. $7 silver, money that could have bought a meal or a few tools, had instead bought him a family he didn't know he needed. Mara would tuck her son into bed, then sit beside Caleb with a cup of tea. They didn't talk much, but silence between them felt peaceful now. It was the kind of quiet that held comfort, not sorrow. Outside, the stars spread across the sky. The wind moved softly through the grass, carrying the scent of rain and earth. For the first time in many years, Caleb felt something new settle in his heart. Hope. And though he never asked Mara again about the past, he knew one thing for certain, that the woman and her child were meant to find him, and that the ranch, once empty, had finally become a place where broken souls could rest. That $7 night had started with fear and whispers, but it ended with a miracle, and with it a reminder that even in the loneliest corners of the world, kindness could still bring life back from the dark.